Most SaaS companies do not lose ARR because the product stops working suddenly. They lose it because as they mature, they start doing the wrong grown up things. They add process, complexity, layers, and internal logic that make perfect sense inside the company and create friction everywhere else. The video today is going to break down five of the most common ways mature SaaS businesses quietly stall growth, weaken expansion, and invite churn. But before we get into the five mistakes, let's start with the biggest pattern behind all of them. The issue is not maturity itself. Mature companies should have better systems, stronger execution, and more durable revenue engines. But a lot of SaaS companies mature in the wrong direction. Instead of becoming easier to buy from, easier to deploy, and easier to expand, they become heavier. And when that happens, the customer feels it long before the finances see it. As companies scale, they often stop asking, how fast can we help the customer realize value? And start asking, which team owns this? That is when handoffs multiply. Sales hands to onboarding, onboarding hands to CS, CS hands to support, support hands to product, and product sends it into backlog purgatory. Internally, that looks organized. To the customer, it feels slow and fragmented. And slow time to value is one of the cleanest ways to damage retention and expansion. Once process starts outweighing speed, the next problem is usually pricing. A mature SaaS company often ends up with pricing that looks like an archaeological dig. Old packaging decisions, custom exceptions, strains usage metrics, overlapping plans, and seat models that actively discourage broader adoption. The company calls that sophistication. The buyer calls it exhausting. If customers do not clearly understand what they are paying for and why it matters, conversion slows, expansion gets awkward, and procurement starts cutting. And that confusion gets even worse when overall buying experience becomes too complex. And that brings us to the third item on the list, which is becoming too enterprise to be easy. A lot of mature SaaS companies pride themselves on being enterprise grade. Sometimes that means security, governance, and scale. Sometimes it just means harder to buy, harder to launch, and harder to change. Buyers still want enterprise outcomes, but they want them with consumer grade ease. If your platform is too painful to implement, too complicated to socialize internally, or too dependent on services to become useful, it becomes vulnerable the moment budget pressure hits. And even if the product stays in the account, there's another trap. The company stops selling outcomes. And that brings us to our fourth item. And that is selling the platform instead of the outcome. Now, in the early years, SaaS companies sold transformation. They talked about speed, savings, automation, visibility, and measurable business impact. Later down the road, many of those same companies drift into platform defense mode. The story becomes features, footprint, history, and strategic importance. But customers do not renew software to reward it for existing. They renew because it still solves a costly problem. The moment that value story gets fuzzy, someone in procurement starts asking the question nobody wants to hear. Do we still need all of this? And that leads directly to the final mistake, which is usually the reason churn feels sudden when it really wasn't. And that's confusing contracted revenue with customer health, which is one of the most common mistakes mature SaaS companies end up making. The logo is still live, the contract is still active, and the renewal is months away. So everyone assumes the account is fine. Meanwhile, the executive sponsor disappears, product usage narrows, and the champion leaves, and the relationship shifts from strategic to transactional. I think we've all been there. That is not stability, that is pre churn. Most churn does not happen suddenly. It leaks into the account long before the renewal conversation makes it visible. So when you put these five together, the pattern becomes pretty obvious. These five issues are not random. They are all versions of the same failure mode. The company matures operationally, but the customer experience gets worse. Buying gets harder, adoption gets slower, value gets fuzzier, risk signals get ignored. And by the time the revenue impact becomes visible, the underlying damage has often been building for quarters. The obvious question then is, what should maturity look like instead? So the thing is, the goal is not to act like an early stage company forever. The goal is to mature in a way that creates leverage. Better maturity means customers get value faster, pricing becomes easier to understand, buying becomes easier to justify, outcomes become easier to prove, and risk becomes easier to spot early. That is the kind of maturity that protects ARR instead of quietly draining it. So let's close with one core takeaway for the video. And that's a lot of mature companies are not broken. They are just optimized in a way that quietly destroys ARR. More structure, less speed. More packaging, less clarity. More process, less value. The companies that win from here will not be the ones that look the most mature on an org chart. They'll be the ones that make maturity feel simpler, faster, and more valuable to the customer. That's the real test. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to SaaS Evolved for sharp analysis on where software is going next. We cover SaaS strategy, AI disruption, market shifts, and the decisions that separate durable companies from the ones that slowly fade out. Thanks again for watching, and if you can think of any other mistakes that more established SaaS companies generally make that usually cost ARR, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about it. That's all for now. See you in the next one.